Okay, I think you can start it again. Oh, that's helpful.
Sets the tone.
Yeah, it does. Wait a minute, is this not the Schubert? Yes, it is.
So spät durch Nacht und Wind. Es ist der Vater mit seinem Kind. Hat den Knaben vor in dem Arm. Fasst ihn sicher, hält ihn warm.
Now that's the first stanza, right? It's not a melody that you would whistle on your way home, right? It's sort of more jagged, more abstract, more hard to remember. It's really not, in some ways it's almost operatic. So he's not allowing us to sink into a kind of recognizable melodic form, not really. It has its symmetry in a sense, but it's also kind of sort of countermanded by this formlessness of the melodic line. Second stanza.
Mein Sohn, was birgst du so bang dein Gesicht? Siehst Vater, den Erlkönig nicht, den Erlenkönig mit Kron und Schweif. Mein Sohn, es ist ein Lebensstreif.
Now, what happens here? Now the Erlking sings.
Liebes Kind, komm, geh mit mir, gar schöne Spiele spielen mit dir. Manch bunte Blumen sind an dem Stand, meine Mutter hat manch kühlen Gewand. Mein Vater, und hörst du nicht?
Now that was the Erlking singing, and then the son responding. Now, one of the curious things here is that the response of the son comes immediately after the Erlking finishes. And normally when you have a piano accompaniment with a little interlude or a prelude, you'd have a little interlude and then the next stanza would come. But because of in other words, what Schubert is doing is he's responding to the emotional content, and especially when it comes to the supernatural side of this thing, the child is startled, and so the music comes immediately. That is contrary to the form that would allow the startled child to come. What Reichert does is he would you just sing it in a different tone when the child comes up. The other curious thing is, and this is really eerie, is that the Erlking actually has a real melody. Du liebes Kind, komm geh mit mir, da 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 di da, da da di bom bom, da da di da da. I mean, that you could really, that one you can sing home, right? Right. So the supernatural, that's really ironic. The supernatural has kind of a classical cloak. I don't know what that means exactly, but it's spooky. It's like the devil comes in natural clothing, right? It's, something like that, So there's an irony there that I think is kind of charming.
Was Erlenkönig mit leise verspricht. Sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind, in dürren Blättern säuselt der Wind. Ist feiner Knabe, du
Another melody.
Meine Töchter wollen dich warten schön, meine Töchter führen den nächtlichen Wein und wiegen und tanzen und singen dich ein, und wiegen und tanzen und singen dich ein. Mein Vater, und siehst du nicht dort, Töchter am düstern Ort.
Now, something you may not have noticed, but every time the son gets scared, after the first time, he says, mein Vater, my father, my father, my father. And in what Schubert does with that, you don't notice it maybe consciously, but you hear it unconsciously, is that each time he does it, it's a little higher. The first time it's mein Vater, and the next time it's mein Vater, and this time it's mein Vater. It gets higher and higher each time as the fear of the child gets higher and higher. Right? And that's something, again, that classical form would not account for that. The classical form would hold everything, including emotions, in a classical frame. Right? It's contained within a formal convention, even though the fear itself would be informal. And that's, of course, what Reichert does as well. And a little parallel to that, by the way. Where have we heard that before? I don't know if we pointed it out. But you may have noticed when the ghost in Don Giovanni comes on stage, when he's singing to Don Giovanni, saying, repent, and I've come here to give you a chance to repent. Every time the ghost comes in, it's a step higher. And every time, Don Giovanni says no, and the ghost comes in again, and it's a step higher. And so Mozart does exactly the same thing. He raises that emotional tension by raising the pitch, by raising the tenor, so to speak, of the sound. That's not a classical idea. That's more, usually not a classical idea. It's more of a romantic notion.
Mein Sohn, ich sehe es genau, es scheinen die alten Weiden so grau. Ich liebe dich, mich reizt eine schöne Gestalt, und bist du nicht willig, so brauch ich Gewalt. Mein Vater, jetzt fasst mich an. Der König hat mir ein Leid getan. Der Vater grausend, reitet geschwind, hält ihn an, das ächzende Kind. In seinen Armen das Kind war tot.
And notice that when the singer ends, he ends on a note that does not close the harmony. War tot is not here. Right? That's where it wants to go. And the piano finishes that off. The piano does a little cadence at the end, which takes us to the home, home, so to speak, to the home chord. But that even that sense that the thing ends, at least in the voice, it ends unresolved. That too is romantic. That could be the definition of romantic, if you wanted to say so. If you don't close things with a formal closure. Of course, in some sense, Schubert does with the piano, nevertheless. But you can see how he's playing with a totally new concept of what the song should do, or what it can do, let's say. Schubert was so convinced that he was onto something here, that he wanted to make this his opus 1, opus 1. And no one would publish it because, first of all, it was so strange, and secondly, it wasn't playable, as you just noticed with me. Of course, people could play it, but you had to be pretty good. And so it's a difficult piece to play. Not totally impossible, it can be learned, but it's tough. So that's one thing. Let's see, what else did I want to say? There's one other thing. Just a little detail. This expression, bist du nicht willig, so brauche ich Gewalt. If you're not willing, I'm going to use force. Remember that in the Erlking, one of the last thing that Erlking says to him, has become a standard expression in German. Everybody uses it for whatever. I noticed that when I had a girlfriend in Germany when I was studying there, and she couldn't get her notebook out of her bag, and she said, so bist du nicht willig, so brauche ich Gewalt. She used the line. So you mean use it for anything, you know. If you're, so anyway, that's beside the point, but interesting. Cool. Let's take a break.